Welcome back to the Open Water Talk Show, where we bring in experts to give their takes on all kinds of topics. And today I am super excited. We are going to be talking about how to write your first novel. We have as our guest, I couldn't think of anyone better to do this with than Carolyn Prusa. She is the author of None of This Would Have Happened If Prince Were Alive, her debut novel, correct? That came
Correct.
out in what year? That came out last year or 2 years ago?
2022.
Okay, so about 2 years ago. But you
But
wrote
you can
this.
still get it.
You can still get it at bookshop.org or wherever you want, your local bookstore. Find it. It's a really fun read, but we're going to be talking about writing your first novel. First off, welcome to the show and thank you for being here, Carolyn.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Okay, so let's start. How long did you've been many things. You've been a yoga teacher, you're an active volunteer, you're a mother. How long have you wanted to write and publish a novel?
Ever since I jumped out of the vagina.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you leapt out knowing what you want to do. Graceful, I am sure. So you've always wanted to write a book.
Yes. I always was a creative kid, and I snooze majored in English for college and then the grad school. So I was always about the reading and the writing.
Okay. And then so did you have many attempts along the way to getting to this novel? And then this was just the first one that clicked, or how many times have you tried writing a novel?
Oh, you're darn tootin'. I think this was the third.
Okay.
The first one someone bought. The one before that was a young adult novel, and it got far. I had a different agent for that, and it got shopped, but that one did not get picked up.
So the first one got bought, but did it ever get to like what?
Oh no, the young adult one was agented and shopped around, but not
Right.
purchased. So
Right.
this one was different agent and then purchased.
Okay. Got it. And so what sort of was is it just something that you've always been doing then? Just like you would always find time to write, or give me a little sense of like how you went from I want to do it to doing it to having done it.
I think, and I'm still working on it, and I think a lot of people struggle with this. I think that it's hard to sort of announce to the world, I want to write fiction. So I always wrote as a creative outlet when I was doing other things to pay the bills, not pay the bills very well. But I never had the confidence to sort of put it first. And that confidence came, I think, actually after I became a mother, which was bizarre because the amount of writing time that I had shrunk rapidly. But my motivation went through the roof.
And the motivation just like I've hit this milestone and I want to do it, or was the motivation like I want to, what was that motivation?
It was just like, I can write marketing copy, I can write content copy, I can do social media for other people. But I've got stories, and I think I've got a little bit of talent, not that much. So I should try to do the thing I want to do.
All right. So let's talk about the book real quick. Again, none of this would have happened if Prince were alive. Explain to people exactly what it is. What's it about?
Well, um, before I now live in Reading, which is a woodland fairy forest in Connecticut. We lived in Savannah for 10 years. And Savannah, for the most part, kind of did okay with some of the tropical weather. And then we just got slammed. And so every fall, it would be like, do I stay or do I go? And we would do hurricane prep. And my writing, or the critiques I got in my writing before, have been like, Carolyn, solid characters, were entertained, but it's lacking urgency. So after my young adult novel didn't happen, I was thinking, as we sort of like packed up for Hurricane Matthew, I was like, maybe people in other parts of the world don't do this every October. And maybe it would be kind of an interesting thing to read about. And maybe a giant life threatening national disaster would sort of give my character some urgency. So that was sort of the construct. And then sort of about mom trying to get her kids out of town while Hurricane Matthew beats down her path and sort of hijinks ensue.
You can really feel you can feel the urgency, and it's like, as someone who's been there, right? There's a lot of verisimilitude in there because you're talking about some people are very mellow as the weather reports come in. Some people are boarding things up. Others are hitting the road because they want to get out of town before the highways get backed up, right? So those little details really do bring a sense of urgency, which kind of leads me to my question, which is, where does Carolyn end and Ramona begin? And I say that just because, I've known you for a little while, and the things like references to Prince music and specific parties, and that verisimilitude of having discussions with either your mother or your neighbors or whomever, right, really ring true. So I'm wondering for you, sort of, like I said, where do you end and the main character begins? Or do they? Or is it completely fictionalized and I'm totally wrong?
How dare you? No, there's a lot of me in Ramona. Um, there's a lot of my experience as a mom. Um, I didn't have that long a window as a 9 to 5 mom with little kids, but it wasn't a party. So there's a lot of me in there. I think Ramona is wound a little more tightly.
Mhm.
I think she's a little more sensitive to other people's opinion, and she's also an outsider to Savannah. So some of the Southern customs and things that are accepted are a little bit like, what? Whereas I grew up down there and I know all kinds of crazy.
Got it. So that leads me to the next question, right? Because you have such nice details in there that obviously, at least maybe not always specifically, but are borne out in something, especially when it comes to the kids. I assume like tantrums and needing, sleeping and staying, watching movies to keep them sort of occupied. Obviously, any parent can relate to that. But, I had heard a quote, I think it's from Quentin Tarantino, apologies for people who don't like that. But he once said
Team
that if you like,
hashtag Team Uma. Huh.
well, he once said that if you aren't pissing other people off, you aren't really writing, right? And I think what he was trying to say, and I think I may be misquoting that, right? But what he was trying to say is that, like, if you're not pulling from actual stories and people don't recognize themselves in the characters, right, then you aren't really drawing from your experience. Now, assuming that I haven't totally mangled that, right? Like, how much did you decide to bring in, right? Like, I'm going to assume your husband isn't, isn't, I don't want to give, plot points of the book away, but I'm going to, it seems like,
There's trouble, listeners. There's trouble in paradise. We'll tell you that. No, and that was kind of purposeful, although probably there's people that think that my husband is a lying, cheating, son of a bitch. No, I purposely made him sort of the opposite of my husband. And I was also trying to create just like this Southern guy. I don't know if you've hung out with them, who is just like at ease everywhere, and they got a Yeti cooler in the truck, and they're just like prepared for every situation and get away with a lot of stuff based on their charm. And that was the inspiration for Desmond.
Well, so the reason I ask is because as you dropped in these details about neighbors and about, like, did you have to, were people like, is that me? Did you write about,
Yeah,
and were people really like,
everybody thinks they're in it,
and are
which
they?
is which is awkward. No, I told my friends I have a friend who is a mother of twins, and she did get her breasts enhanced after because she said that they drained them and ruined them. So I said, I put your breast in the book, and she was honored. And then I have another friend who told me about the trunk parades
Mm-hmm.
at the yacht club, which still happens. And I said, I stole that from your life. So I told those people.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just part of the process, right? Like you want to write what you know, but you don't want to upset people. You don't want to share something, even if it's sort of anonymized, that they feel bad for identifying. I'm just wondering how you navigated that process before you were even able to like say, "Hey, I included your breasts in this book." Were you like, "Ooh, should I do this? Should I not do that?" And I think that's important for people who are writing their novels to see, to gauge like what their level of comfort is in terms of being conscientious around how much reality, how much from their own life or the lives of others around them they put into a book.
Right. But I think writing is so hard to begin with. I don't think anyone should let that get in their way. If you're writing a memoir about how terrible your parents are, then you should probably worry about that. But if you're writing something that's fiction and maybe you're inspired by someone in your neighborhood, you just say, "Oh, it's made up."
There you go. Okay. Well, all right. So let's get into some of the brass tacks here when writing a book. What program or app did you use for writing this? Or did you write it out longhand? Like, what was what was the physical process of writing like?
Microsoft Word.
Really? So you didn't use like Scrivener or anything to sort of separate out chapters or anything like that?
No, um, I have recently started doing Google Docs for random scenes in case I am somewhere and I just want to log into my drive and not saving all the time. But yeah, I'm not fancy.
Okay.
I
No,
can't read my I can't read my own handwriting because I write like a serial killer.
okay. That's okay.
So Microsoft Word.
Okay, so Microsoft Word, pretty easy, but carrying that over, somebody could use Google Drive, right? Like, and then they have access to it all the time. And then was each document a different chapter, or was it all just one big document?
So I write in a giant monolith. And then when you get to like draft 4 or draft 5, then you're breaking into chapters. But I like to have my monolith because that changes.
Got it. And then are you the kind of person when you write, are you writing, let's say you write chapter or whatever, you write your first chunk of the monolith, and then day two, do you go back to the beginning, reread what you write, and then take up from there? Or are you starting at the end? Like, are you kind of editing as you're going, or are you just adding?
I'm an editing as I'm going person, which has changed, I would say, the last 5 to 10 years. Because I used to just feel like energy and sort of a high of the blank page and the new stuff. And I never wanted to go back and fix it. But now I don't like the idea of the crappy stuff just hanging out in my monolith.
Got it. So you want to go back and tweak things, go like, oh, I put in extra whatever there, I can remove that.
Not
Then it just
yeah,
feels,
not ready for prime time, but I want like a draft that I can read.
yes. Okay. Um, so now I want to, the one thing I think people always bump up against is like, oh, I just don't have the time. Right. And if you want to do it, you can make the time. It's easy for me to say, right? Oh, just make the time. But you hear stories of like Chuck Palahniuk or whatever wrote the first draft of Fight Club on a legal pad under a Freightliner truck when he was working there. And
Sure.
so, you're just like, ooh, well, what excuse do I have? Um, so how did you structure your writing day, especially since you are a mom, right? And you have, all kinds of, you're an active volunteer, you have all kinds of obligations. So how did you do like writing sprints? I'm going to give myself a half hour and I'm just going to shut the world out and write. Or did you have to wait and either wake up early or stay up late after the kids went to bed and didn't, weren't hanging on you for juice boxes or whatever? What was your sort of, how did you structure your writing to make sure that you got it done?
So I used to, in my youth, and by my youth I mean 30s, I used to work in those weird times and do stuff late at night. And now I've discovered I can't be very smart late at night. Also, I wish I was smart. I remember that you're a natural early riser. I wonder if you still are. I've tried to be one of those 5 a.m. writers, and also I'm not smart at that hour. So what I found that works, and I have a prop, is this is my little mushroom timer.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a technique. I don't know who invented it. Have you heard of Pomodoro?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No.
So you turn off your internet and all of your tech stuff. And I will set my mushroom timer for 35 minutes. Write your face off or edit your face off. It doesn't have to be good. And I'll try to do 3 of those. So that doesn't have to be all in a row. If I could do like 3 if they're spread out in a day, that's okay. If I could do 2 Pomodoros, that's like 3 hours total, which I feel pretty good about.
Okay, so you're breaking it up into 35-minute chunks, and then doing multiple sets of those throughout the day. Okay.
Um, Ideally, like, and some writers are the kind of people that can, I don't know, maybe go to the library or like go to a cave somewhere and bang something out like 8 hours at a time. And I don't think my brain works that well.
How long did it take you to write None of This Would Have Happened?
Um, like the writing part or the whole enchilada?
Do you tell? So let's talk about the act of writing. How long did it take you to write your first draft?
I would say the first draft was crappy and was showed to no one. I would say that was like 6 months. Let me close.
No problem.
So I would say from maybe like 3 years from the first word to starting to try to get an agent. That was
Okay.
probably like 5 drafts.
Okay, so 5 drafts in there. Okay. And now let's move on to that part. Did you ever consider self-publishing? Like there are lots of tools out there where people could, upload their book to Amazon and sell it as an ebook, right? How dedicated were you to actually having a physical book that was on a shelf?
I was dedicated. I didn't consider, like I would have, but I didn't consider self-publishing because it found a home um, with Atria. And also, I think self-publishing is super cool and people have opened a lot of doors. You also have to do a lot of hustling. You have to do a lot of hustling anyway for yourself as an author. And so I was kind of hoping that I could land it somewhere where I would have a little team to help me get out in the world.
So let's talk about landing your team and landing your agent, right? So you had one for the YA novel, and it sounds like you had a different one for the Prince book.
Yeah.
Now, to me, it seems like getting an agent is impossible, and it's not even something that I would even attempt, right? And so, but how difficult really was it for you to get an agent? And was there something that you did, or was it just like a brute force attack, just sending it out?
It's yeah, for both of them, I queried and listeners, um, query letter is a brief synopsis of your story and maybe a line or two about your experience and who it might appeal to. So agents don't have oodles of time. I don't know how many query letters they get in a day or a week, but it's a lot. So you're trying to grab their attention. And then after that, there are 17 possible layers of rejection available to you. They might be interested in say, hey, send me 10 pages. And then like 2 months later, they might say, no, thanks. Or they might say, oh, send me the rest, and then reject you like 2 months later. It's not a process for the faint of heart, I would say. But my current agent is so smart and positive and inspiring. She's like one of the best people I've ever met. And that relationship has really shaped my writing and my belief in myself.
Well, that's great. So do you remember how many query letters you sent out?
I think it was probably 40 or 50 for both of them.
Really?
But so you send out like maybe 10 at a time because you don't want to be like just fire hose.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of waiting because they're busy.
Yeah.
And if they've got 3 or 4 manuscripts. I don't know, the average one probably like 200 to 350 pages. It's a lot. So there's a lot of waiting, and then you might get a nibble, and then you imagine yourself, sort of rolling around in coins like in DuckTales.
Yeah.
And then 3 months later, they'll, send you a rejection. It's like a form letter. So, I mean, it's a tough, long process, and most writers probably encourage you to keep writing while you are sending out stuff.
And then once you got the acceptance from your agent, then they went and shopped it around. And then how long was that process?
Oh no, before the shopping, you're getting it ready with your agent.
Okay. Okay. So you're going back and making
So you've
edits,
got
changing
like
things around.
maybe 3 more drafts with your agent if it's a good one. You don't want your agent to be like, "This is great, I can sell it tomorrow," because it's not.
Yeah.
You want your agent to work with you to get it to the best shape.
Got it. And then, okay. So how long was that process? Again, because they're probably busy, you have multiple clients. Was that like 3 months, 6 months, a year?
So that's like 6 months.
Okay.
Um, so then they will shop it out. So they will research and think of editors that might be a great fit for it. So they will shop it out also in small batches.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be like 4 to 8 editors at a time, because then there's another period of waiting for them to read it.
Yeah. Okay. So then how long did it take for the Prince book to go from agent to publication?
2 years.
2 years. Okay. And then in that time, you're just like waiting, right? Like that's
You're supposed to be writing, but yeah, I was waiting and writing,
okay.
and you're
Well, yeah,
doing your
sure.
day job.
Still out there working.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So
Okay.
that
Well,
is, if anyone gets the idea through this podcast, it is a long process, and self-publishing is probably speedier.
right. But you don't have the team, right? Which is what you
Right.
were talking about. So I'm curious then, the team helps you obviously probably put together design, packaging, marketing, dealing with sales channels and other kinds of things as it goes into stores. Was this, I don't know anything really about the publisher. Was this just like a national book, or did it roll out sort of regionally, or how did that work?
It's national. They decide a print run. I don't actually know how they determine that.
Okay. But they said, we're going to print this many copies and then send it out to whatever chains, local, national, regional chains, right? They'll just determine by some process how many to send out.
And then the paperback traditionally comes out a year later.
Okay. All right. So you've written a book, gotten an agent, you're shopping it out there, it's out there now. And then you talked about the hustle, right? Like, so what was your hustle for this book?
I'm still working on my hustle, Chris. I did a couple local events at bookstores, which was really special because we were just coming out of COVID, and a lot of super talented authors that I knew had been like, my friend Amy had spent 10 years researching and writing her book, and it came out during COVID. So there was like champagne in one of the squares. So it was really exciting to like be in a room with friends and readers and people that were excited for me. So I did a couple little book events, and then you're supposed to have a social media presence as an author, which feels a little weird because I'm both a Southern woman and Gen X, so it's like not natural for us to talk about ourselves.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to be out there, you know, showing the cover,
Yeah.
doing the blurbs. Um, so that's something to navigate too, because you need your writing time, but you're also supposed to be doing in a little bit of work, getting it out there.
So I'm going to ask what is I'm not trying to pry. It's sort of a delicate question, but for somebody who's aspiring to write a novel, at what point can they expect it to be like? At what level do you have to get to where it could be like your full time job? Do you need to sell like 1 million copies of something? I don't know if you know like offhand what that might be, but what's a realistic expectation for someone?
What do they want health insurance? Um, I would say I think if you sell 10,000 books, um, publishers would probably notice. People would notice. The level of advances seems to vary widely.
Yeah.
It's also spread out over a period of 2 years. So, not to be uncouth, but so mine was probably equivalent. It's not like I was a stockbroker before. So mine kind of over 2 years probably spread out to the equivalent of my salary as a copywriter.
Got it. But yeah,
Um,
but like you said, it's spread out and it's an advance. So it's not like free money.
um, so there are, and I think after I published two, I was sort of paying attention to people whose careers I admired, and there are, a group of women that just like crank out these books, and they do so because they're pitching them when their book comes out, and they're sort of like in a rhythm of writing, and maybe that could be me one day. I don't know. I don't know if creatively I'm like that. So, someone who is very driven and has a lot of books down the line in their brain, that could be possible.
And so what are you doing differently this next time around? So I assume that you're writing your next one. And what are you doing? How are you approaching it? What did you learn from the last time around that you're applying this time around?
I think I'm smarter about conflict and urgency. That's a pro. The
And you're
con is,
writing in
yes,
your writing. That means not just like with your agent.
um, with my day-to-day life. So,
Yes.
with my writing, the con is that I feel like everybody said the second one was harder, and I was like, "Why? What's your problem?" It was really hard getting the first one done. But now I realize that it does feel like a little pressure. The only person that's putting pressure on me is me, but it does feel like a little bit of pressure.
Well, it's like they say with like the second album, right? You had 22 years to write the first one and then 2 years
Yeah.
to write the follow-up, right? Like that, I
And
imagine that there's some of that mixed in there.
and so when I was writing Prince, I never really thought I thought maybe other people would read it, but it was like mostly me in sort of a little um cave. Cave has come up a lot today. Being as creative and weird as I wanted to. And now, like, I do have smart people reading it and helping me and sort of weighing in. But so that means I have more voices in my head
Mm.
beyond the regular voices that were already in my head.
So you're actually, so part of you might feel like you're actually writing towards somebody like, well, I know Tiffany is going to say, oh, don't do this. So
A little bit.
maybe I won't do that. Right. I can imagine that you have those kinds of ideas bouncing around in there.
Which I think any creative person who sort of like wants to make something that is accessible and approachable to think people, I think any creative person is probably up against that.
Yeah. All right. So what's a bit of advice you would have for somebody in our community here who has always wanted to write a book? They've got like the nugget of an idea. What's what's the first step they should take towards getting it, at least the first draft completed?
Okay, does the person have like a nerd writing background?
Well, I'm not speaking to one person in particular. I'm just talking in general. Like in
Like, right?
general, if
Are we
somebody
talking sign up for a writing class?
okay.
It could be online. I would recommend in 3D because I feel like humans need to interact with each other. Um, that might be a place where you could meet some potential readers. I think it's smart to have beta readers, we call them, like 2 or 3 people who are going to be honest. In terms of your first draft, um, you got to just start writing. You can make an outline. For some people, deadlines work. I don't know if they always work, depending on how your creativity flows. And just gotta sit down and crank it out.
All right, crank it out. Advice from Carolyn Prusa, the author of None of This Would Have Happened If Prince Were Alive. It's a delightful book. Please go get it at bookshop.org or your local bookstore. Carolyn, if people wanted to follow you on social media and learn more about you and your writing and keep tabs on your next book progress, where should they go?
Go to the Instagram, and I'm Carolyn Prusa, and I always like to hear if you've read something that knocked your socks off. I always want to hear what people are reading.
Excellent. Carolyn Prusa, thank you so much for being on the show today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Chris. You're the best.
I do my best.
Chris. Who are all the
There's too many of us. Children of the 70s were all over the place.
Chris Pine, Thor.
Oh, you're going way up. That's
nobody likes Chris Pratt anymore, do they?
I don't know.
Okay, you're the best, Chris.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I appreciate it. All right.